What's up, YouTube? How we doing? Matt Modi here on my solo YouTube channel, Jedi Modi. Appreciate everybody tuning in. This video, what we're going to be doing is doing a way too early look at the Super Bowl odds for next season, 2023-2024. So I am recording this just merely days after the Eagles' gut-wrenching, horrifying, just distraught Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs that I am still not yet over. But sportsbooks already have odds posted for next year, so I figured I would look into the odds, give my analysis and my favorite picks as well. Before I get started, I would appreciate it for those of you tuning in if you could like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not yet already. Helps me out a ton as I try to grow this separate YouTube channel outside of the main OddsJam one. And then, of course, comment on your thoughts and analysis as well. So what I'm going to be doing here is sharing my screen, just pulling up the OddsJam odds page for all of the major sports books that are currently offering odds for the Super Bowl. So right off the bat, no surprise here, the Kansas City Chiefs are the favorite. In their first year without Tyreek Hill, what did the Chiefs do? Get the 1 seed in the AFC and win the Super Bowl. They also, which kind of got a little bit underreported, had a lot of young players specifically starting on their defense. I think they had 6 or 7 rookies play meaningful snaps for the Chiefs defense, which the scary part, if you're thinking about that, is their defense should be better next year than it was this year with how many young players they had. So obviously there's no surprise with the Chiefs being the Super Bowl favorites. They deserve to be Super Bowl favorites. Even if they had lost to the Eagles, I still think that they should have been Super Bowl favorites next year. You can't count out Andy Reid and Mahomes, and they're just an incredible football team. I don't really have much analysis there other than, yeah, of course. What I did, there's 2 things that I found interesting. Number one, I found it interesting that the Bills had the next best odds to win the Super Bowl. Now, if you want to bet on the Bills, obviously you should do that at plus 900 odds at BetMGM. Obviously, that makes the most sense when you look at the other 3 books, Caesars, DraftKings, and BetRivers, price it at plus 700 or plus 750. Now, looking at the Bills, like I said, I'm surprised that they have better odds than the Bengals, and then also than either of the NFC teams as well. Maybe I have too much of a sour taste in my mouth based on how the Bills ended the season. Also because they did have a ton of injuries, and also Josh Allen had an elbow injury. So maybe I'm putting too much stock into that, but I was not impressed with what I saw from the Bills. Pretty much the second half of the season. Now, yes, they did have some injuries, but if you look at the first 6 weeks of the year, they probably had the best offense and the best defense. Now, in Josh Allen's career with the Bills, granted he's young, but in the 3 years he's been an elite quarterback, one thing that has been consistent with the Bills is that they start off fast, they have a little bit of a lull in the middle of the season, and then they end strong. That happened, well, aside from this past year, that happened for the previous 2 years for the Bills. And the way you can reconcile that is, okay, they're hyped up to start the season. They're playing their best. As the season goes on, they start to lose their edge a little bit in the doldrums, the toughness of the middle of the season. They just lose their edge a little bit. And then when things start to matter, they turn it on at the end. That's what they did 2 years ago. That's what they did, I guess I should say 3 years ago. That's what they did 2 years ago. But they didn't do that this year. And my thought process on that, there's a lot of factors that you could explain that away. Injuries, very, very real thing. Von Miller got hurt, was out for the rest of the year, tore his ACL. Micah Hyde, neck injury, missed the majority of the season. Tre'Davious White, their number 1 cornerback, missed the majority of the season as he recovered from a torn ACL from last year. So you can kind of explain that stuff away. My problem with the Bills, and specifically Josh Allen, is his accuracy can be erratic. When he's on, it looks amazing. It looks like that Chiefs-Bills playoff game from a couple of years ago where he's just throwing darts all over the field. But when he's off, his accuracy can get away from him. And that's what we saw happen a lot of times when you saw the Bills struggle. I'm thinking about that Jets game, the game he got hurt in when the Bills lost. Before that injury, he was just spraying the ball all over the field and not in a good way. He was missing high, low, left, right. So when Josh Allen is locked in and he's accurate, he's one of the best. I mean, he's already one of the best. I'd probably put him third best quarterback in the NFL, aside from Burrow and Mahomes. But his accuracy can come and go, and the Chiefs don't have any sort of running game to rely on. So in those games where his accuracy fails him, he really can't do much. They don't have a second thing that they can do. So that's kind of my issue with the Bills. I probably, if it were up to me, I would put the Bengals as favorites above the Bills. I think that, what the Bengals did this year, so they lost their first 2 games, and everybody thought that the sky was falling down. And then they responded by winning like 11 of their next 13 games, something absurd like that. And then obviously they beat the Bills in the playoffs. Not only did they beat them, they absolutely smoked them. That game was a rout from the beginning. They dominated them up front, and that was missing 3 offensive line starters. So I don't think the Bengals are getting enough love. They're probably going to return their defensive coordinator, who's been a phenomenal defensive coordinator. The way he's been able to change up their game plan depending on the opponent is incredibly impressive. And Chris Jones wrecked that playoff game against the Chiefs. If the Bengals had a healthy offensive line, maybe Chris Jones doesn't wreck that game as much, and maybe the Bengals beat the Chiefs, and maybe the Bengals are Super Bowl champions. So if it were up to me, I would put the Bengals as second best favorites. Now, just to close the book on the Bills before we move on, I will say I can understand the argument that they had a lot of things happen outside of the football field that could have affected them on the field. I'm willing to buy that. Obviously, the biggest thing being Damar Hamlin. That was horrible. You can understand if the team wasn't able to get their edge after witnessing that happen to one of their teammates. They also had the scenario in which the blizzard, like 12 people in Buffalo died from the blizzard. They had to have a home game moved to Detroit because of the blizzard. And then there was also a shooting in Buffalo as well. So I can understand if someone were to tell me, hey, you're being too hard on the Bills. Think about all the stuff that happened off the field. I'm willing to buy that. But if it were up to me, like I said, I would put the Bengals as better favorites than the Bills. Now, looking at the NFC, this is also interesting. The 49ers are favorites over the Eagles, depending on the sports books you look at. But on average, the 49ers are more favored, and they are the favorite to go out of the NFC. Now, as an Eagles fan, I can immediately see Eagles fans saying, oh, we're being disrespected. How could you have the 49ers over us, blah, blah, blah. I can actually understand the argument, starting with the 49ers. So their defense was incredible last year. Incredible. Number 1 defense in the entire NFL. So losing DeMeco Ryans hurts, but they're replacing him with another really, really good defensive mind and defensive coordinator in Steve Wilks. So generally, when you lose a coordinator as good as DeMeco Ryans, you expect them to take it. You expect that unit to take a step back. I'm not exactly expecting that to happen for the 49ers because of Steve Wilks. Now, yes, it was unfortunate, obviously, that the 49ers had so many quarterback injuries. No team is going to be able to survive the amount of quarterback injuries that they had. And they're going to have some questions at the quarterback position heading into next year as well. Brock Purdy got surgery on his hurt elbow. He's not projected to be ready until OTAs. And I saw some doctors on Twitter say it's going to be iffy. It's going to be iffy if he, that's hard to say, iffy if he will be ready for OTAs as well. So we're going to have to monitor that. Then there's Trey Lance, who has now spent the first 2 years of his football career barely playing. Obviously, last year, or 2 years ago, his rookie year, he was on the bench, was just really learning the system, learning the offense. This last year, he was the starter the entire year, had a horrible, horrible foot injury, ankle injury, broke his leg, that he actually had to get a second surgery on. So it's not even a guarantee that he will be ready for training camp. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo is a free agent. I don't think they're going to bring him back. I'm guessing they're going to go with one of Purdy or Trey Lance. But even if the quarterback position is somewhat of a question mark, the 49ers could still win. So, I mean, an elite roster up and down the board, elite offensive mind in Kyle Shanahan, who, by the way, is a total coward in games. I think that doesn't get talked about enough, how much of a coward he is in games in terms of not going for it, opting for punts, opting for field goals over going for it on 4th down. But in terms of an offensive play caller and designer of an offense, he's phenomenal. So now let's get to the Eagles. Eagles had one of the best, the best season of their franchise by far. Obviously didn't end in a Super Bowl victory. Incredible, incredible year. Jalen Hurts went 16-1 in his starts this year. And 18-2 if you include the playoffs. So he was amazing. Here is why if someone were to tell you to fade the Eagles, I wouldn't necessarily blame them. And here's why. Number one, they lost both of their offensive and defensive coordinator. Well, they lost their offensive and their defensive coordinator, both head coaching jobs. That's a big deal. What gets underreported in the fallout from the Eagles of their first Super Bowl championship and why things didn't work out. I mean, there's a lot of factors. Wentz being the biggest one, poor drafting being another one. They also lost both their offensive coordinator and their quarterbacks coach after that season, and Doug Peterson didn't do an adequate job replacing them. So it remains to be seen who replaces Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon as their offensive and defensive coordinator. But even if they replace them with the best coaches in the world, you expect there to be a step back, at least at the beginning of the year. There's no way that you can replace both of them and not have any sort of growing pains starting off. So that's number one. Number two, the Eagles' opening day roster from week one had the same exact starting lineup as the Super Bowl roster. Think about that. Not a single starter had a season-ending injury, and they all played in the Super Bowl. That is remarkable health that is almost guaranteed to not happen again next year. There's almost no way that's going to repeat itself. Both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith started all 17 games. Now, you could make the argument that Jalen Hurts hurt his shoulder. Sure, that's fine. He came back and he played. Their offensive line, Lane Johnson missed a couple games at the end, but he played through it. Jordan Mailata missed a game or two with the shoulder injury, but he was mostly fine. On defense, the only player that really, they had a couple players that missed time, Avonte Maddox, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson Jr., but both of their starting cornerbacks played the entire season. Darius Slay, James Bradbury. You're not going to get that again. And then here's a third reason why you should fade the Eagles at the beginning of next season. 7 of their 11 starters on defense are currently free agents. Javon Hargrave, Fletcher Cox, I don't need to name them. You don't care about that. The biggest names being Chauncey Gardner-Johnson Jr., James Bradbury, and Javon Hargrave. All of them Pro Bowl caliber players. James Bradbury was an all-pro. He's already said, it's unlikely they're going to be able to retain him. My guess is that they re-sign Hargrave and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson Jr., but not Bradbury. And that leads me to my last point regarding the Eagles not being good as next year. They're going to have to pay Hurts, which means that they're going to have less money to allocate to the rest of their roster. That's just the nature of the business. When you can win, it's really easy, not really easy. It's easier to win with a rookie on a quarterback, on a rookie deal than it is after. They're going to have to pay him, and they're going to have to get creative with free agents in the draft. And that was really their biggest downfall from their first Super Bowl berth. They paid Wentz all that money. They really did a horrible job in the draft and in free agency after the Super Bowl. Maybe they've learned their lesson. A lot of that stuff is not sticky year over year. Really, really good franchises have bad moves. That happens. The Eagles happen to have 3 off seasons in a row that were pretty much all bad moves. Then the last 2 off seasons have been incredible. So we'll see how it goes. But there's a lot of reasons why you should fade the Eagles, at least at the beginning of the year. So as an Eagles fan, I want to be mad, but I understand it. That's the top 5. Personally, I think the top 5 looks good. I would just flip the Bengals and the Bills personally. Outside of that, if you want to look at some dart throws, couple ones. Cowboys, absolutely not. I'm out on the Cowboys. Their defense will be good, but they lost Kellen Moore. Mike McCarthy, who is a bigger coward than Shanahan, will be the offensive play caller. Could not be more out. Also out on the Chargers. I think Brandon Staley is a really good defensive mind. I think he's an awful, awful head coach. I don't trust him at all as a head coach. I'm out on the Chargers. The Ravens could be interesting. I'll need to see. This is obviously, all of this depends on what happens in the free agency and the draft. But the Ravens, I could see making some noise next year. My guess is that they re-sign Lamar Jackson, of course. And if they can make some moves at wide receiver, that team is built to be really good. The Lions are a fun story. Their ceiling is capped with Jared Goff. The Jaguars, I'm not sure, are ready to take the leap, but maybe they have some potential as a sleeper team. The 2 teams that I wanted to highlight as sleeper teams, number 1 being the New York Jets. I would not be surprised if the Jets were one of the best teams in the NFL next year. Now, this is obviously all dependent on what they do at quarterback. They get Aaron Rodgers. Even if they get Jimmy Garoppolo, they will win some games. They have a phenomenal top 5 maybe even roster outside of the quarterback position. They have weapons on offense. They have a good offensive line. They have good running backs. Their defense is one of the best in the NFL. You get that quarterback position figured out, you could be really good. And then the other team in the AFC that I think has some sleeper potential, the Denver Broncos. How about it? I am personally of the belief that Russell Wilson is not cooked. Awful. He was awful last year. Really bad. No way around that. To me, I'm willing to put that more on the head coach than I am Russell Wilson. I thought Nathaniel Hackett did one of the worst coaching jobs that I've ever seen with what he was doing with Russell Wilson. Sean Payton, as much as I think he's a loser, is a really good head coach. I think he will get the best out of Russell Wilson. I would not be surprised if the Broncos were significantly better than people thought. But to give my official prediction, Super Bowl winner, I'm taking the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that they would have won the Super Bowl if their offensive line didn't get hurt. I think they would have beaten the Chiefs in that AFC Championship game. And I just think Joe Burrow, I think he's close to the same level as Mahomes. And I don't think there's any other quarterback you could say that about. So my official prediction, Super Bowl winner next year, Super Bowl 58, give me the Cincinnati Bengals plus 1,000 odds at DraftKings. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, let me know what you think. Would I get right? Would I get wrong? What am I an idiot about? But make sure to comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And thanks for watching.